Really excited to have Nanette Ward here today. She's a 2008 founding member of the Stop Human Trafficking Coalition of Central Missouri. She's been an active volunteer with them for the past 15 plus years and is currently serving as the trustee on the board of directors. Nanette has been involved in all various aspects of the coalition's work. She conducts presentations and training in the community, and as a full-time volunteer advocate, works closely with service providers and law enforcement to provide direct support to victims and survivors. In 2017, she was appointed to the Missouri Attorney General's Anti-Human Trafficking Task Force. She also serves on the Coalition Against Human Trafficking, the social service arm of the U.S. Attorney's Office in Western District of Missouri Human Trafficking Rescue Project. After coming to Boone County from Kansas City area in 1994, Ward worked for the Governor's Council on Disability Services for Independent Living, the City of Columbia Human Rights Commission, and the Reynolds Journal Institute. Nanette strives daily to achieve the coalition's vision for communities to be free of modern slavery. Thank you for being here, Nanette. I did just see that movie. Thank you. Bye.
Good. Thank you. I appreciate it. I always try to say neutral, but I like to say that I've done a lot of presentations to pachyderm groups. Just recently was at Dickey's, and I'm so happy to be with Muleskinners. I feel a little bit more at home. So, but still, this message is important no matter what group. And I appreciate that everybody knows that it's relevant, and that we will come into any group anytime, faith-based, non-faith-based, doesn't matter what political party or anything. And we've been well received for over 15 years in many different settings. So thank you. Happy to be here. I guess I'll just maybe mention at the top for those who weren't in on the beginning discussion. I think seeing Sound of Freedom is a great motivator. It's something you can't unsee, big screen, the drama of that and the trauma that you see experienced of children and families who are impacted by those who use force, fraud, and coercion to enslave people of all nations and backgrounds and all of that. And Tim Ballard is a real person, and he was someone who left his military career behind to focus on without the constraints of being part of one particular system, and just went after to help victims, working with the local governments. And so there is so much that we want to take away, and what I hope will be the main takeaway for each of you is this is inspiring. I need to look at what I can do right here in my local community. And we have, in fact, gotten, I can't even tell you how many, I multiple messages through our website a week saying, I saw the movie, how can I help? And that has been thrilling. In fact, we scheduled a special training just because of the increase in interest, and had 24 people come learn about volunteer opportunities for the coalition, and then sat through a 2-hour training on human trafficking. So very committed group of people from all different backgrounds. So I gave, and I want to make sure that you have those questions in your mind, or stop me or put them in chat, or let's make sure we cover those, because there's so many different directions we can take in terms of talking about human trafficking. So this is just one path I'm taking with you today, but there are so many more things that we could talk about. We did a 2-hour intensive presentation, and there was more that could be said, but always, whether it's 10 minutes, 20, 2 hours, 1 hour, I want to make this meaningful. And so I will take you on a journey with me, but also I want you to ask your question. So it was given the title, human trafficking, stealing freedom for profit. It is a $150 billion criminal enterprise. I'll start the slideshow here shortly, but it is a massive criminal enterprise that impacts every country in the world and communities, small and large, across our state and every other state in our country. It just can't be understated how big a criminal enterprise this is that affects us globally and locally. So there is a loss of freedom. We don't normally think of that. We say, America, homeland of the free and the brave, and all the kinds of freedoms that we know that we have, but there is still a stealing of freedom in trafficking, whether it's stealing the documents so that they don't have the proper identity to do things properly and freely, or whether it's stealing their phone in a relationship so that they can't reach out to anybody and they have control in that way, or stealing that opportunity to make a fair wage in labor and are abused in labor. So there is many ways when I say stealing of freedom that it in fact does happen in trafficking. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. And again, I have been a volunteer all this time, so I come with this with a heart and a passion. I've never received money for any of the 15 years of work that I do. And what I do bring is the opportunity to have met with many people around the state, in particular mid-Missouri, but also every day, my interactions with survivors of human trafficking, which has really enriched my life and enriched the ability of the coalition through them teaching us how to best be better at what we do. So let me get the share screening going. Hope this works. We tested this before with a test Zoom with my admin person. Okay, I'm going to click share. Okay, it's not. There we go.
There you are. Here it comes.
Okay.
Looks good.
Okay, and I'm going to click from the beginning. Quick access toolbar. Okay, there we go. Yay. Whoo. I'll tell you, a lot of nerve-wracking moments when you do anything related to IT. Are you seeing the bottom bar? I was trying to get that. Thank you. There we go. Out of the way. Okay. So you're nodding, like the bar's not in the way. Okay. And I'm going to minimize myself here. Okay. The vision of the coalition is communities free of modern day slavery. Oftentimes human trafficking is referred to as modern day slavery. I know we think of and are very familiar with transatlantic slavery, but there are more slaves today than those years, decades that transatlantic slavery existed. And we have a very clear understanding about where those slaves came from. It was very open. We know where they all went. Nothing was hidden about it. Nothing was underground about it in terms of actually the selling of them. Of course, we know there was underground operations for rescuing and freeing, but in terms of the market being very open and blatantly on display, I think we're all familiar with that and all familiar with the ways that they were controlled and beaten into submission and sexually exploited as well. But in the slavery that we are talking about today, there are more slaves than in that time. Just a quote from Nelson Mandela: slavery is not natural, it is man-made, and it can be overcome and eradicated by the actions of human beings. So again, even from the start of this sharing with you, we want all of you to feel that there is a sense of something that you can do no matter who you are. And it is something we have to continue to be mindful of and be in action to do. So this is an introductory video I'd like to play. Some of you may be familiar with Carl Edwards, one of our local Colombians who was a NASCAR champion. He has been in the background in support of the coalition, and this video was made from a conversation that was in the living room of one of our volunteers with Carl. And she just caught and recorded this conversation that we were having, because oftentimes I would visit with him and share an update. So he had a sense of the day-to-day things that we were seeing and doing. Here we go.
Nanette, is there supposed to be video or audio with this? We're not hearing anything.
Yes.
We're not
Oh
hearing.
my goodness. Okay, well,
Could you
hold
back
on.
up the slides? Go back.
Yes.
I remember attending a different presentation, and this came up. I wasn't the one presenting, I was just watching it happen. And there was something else that had to be clicked. Dave Taylor,
Okay.
can you assist? In order to
Yeah,
get
when you
to get
share
the video.
this,
Mhm.
when you share
Okay.
the screen, there should be an option to
Share sound. Oh my gosh.
well, also share the sound and make the video, what's the word?
Optimize for video clip.
video. Optimize for
Okay.
video.
Phew.
So try that, maybe start
Yeah.
it over, because
Oh
what
my
we
goodness.
Yeah,
saw was
we've got
just like
time.
Okay.
jerky collection of slides with no audio.
Sounds
Okay.
great. Yeah, we've got plenty
Okay.
of time if you just want to start back at the beginning.
Okay.
Thank you, Dave.
Are we good? Is there sound?
Yes.
Yay. Thank you.
So she woke up crying and said, I'm either going to die or I have to leave.
Focus on the pain, the only thing that's real.
A woman who showed up in the parking lot of a local store here in Columbia, and she had nothing, no phone. She was borrowing a phone to call us, and she was in the trafficker's car, which she of course was worried about because she didn't know exactly where the trafficker was. And she got hold of our number, and within minutes, Karen and I were out there to get her.
What have I become? My sweetest friend.
We had two other women who fled, who squirreled away money. They were being sex trafficked, and they were squirreling away money because you have to basically hand it all over. Saved money for the train, took the train to Jeff City with nothing but one duffel bag, no phone. They were borrowing a phone and reached out for help. The phone they were borrowing went dead, and for days I had no idea where they were.
Everyone I know goes away in the end.
called again. A trafficker had caught up with them, and they had more trouble, but they found a way to escape him a second time. And they were standing outside a store in the rain when they managed to get a hold of me again on somebody else's phone. And a volunteer in Jeff City, within minutes, went out there and got them. We brought them to safety.
Beneath the stains of time, the feeling disappears.
So this is what was cool. And those two ladies, they came, the volunteer brought them to Columbia. And of course, we only had the phone conversations. And of course, but I don't know who was happier when I answered and they able to hear me on the phone. And I realized it was them after all those days of not knowing where they were. And so, never actually met them yet, but the volunteer drove them to Columbia. And we happened to be doing some tabling at a church, and they wanted to go ahead and come there. And just greeting them, it's like we were just like family or old friends, just hugging, bear hugging, so relieved.
Full of broken thoughts I cannot repair.
But one of the things she said on the phone, just short time earlier, when she's telling me, she said, Nanette, I'm not a lowlife. And my heart just broke, because it's like, no, but she wanted to make sure I knew that she was worthy. And it's like, there's no question of that. That's like the last thing you want them to be worrying about. But that's that judgment that they feel, that condemnation of the kind of exploitation that they've been in. They know they've been judged. They know that people have looked down on them. And she felt compelled to make sure I knew, Nanette, I'm not a lowlife. It's like, no, you're not.
Beneath the stains of time, the feeling disappears.
All of our talks and everything I've ever heard you say or speak about, you truly live and embody the idea of you hold everyone in such high regard.
You are someone else. I'm still right here.
I can only imagine how great it is for these survivors to actually come into contact with you and for you to treat them in the way that they deserve. It's
If I could start again, billion miles away.
We've had volunteers rise to the occasion of the growth of the number of women we've had to serve. And we are so enriched by the lives of these volunteers, whose lives are then enriched by the women they get to meet, and vice versa. So there's a true community, that's a new kind of community being built.
I would keep myself. I would find a way. I hurt myself.
Sorry, let me-
I hurt myself.
Hold on, there we go. Okay. So quick comment about the gal that I said was in the trafficker's car. She had actually driven away from Jeff City to a Walmart parking lot, and the trafficker wasn't there when she left, but she grabbed the keys and took off. But we literally just had her leave the car in the parking lot, because there really was no other thing for her to do without being found or identified. And she had been trafficked by someone who had originally presented himself as a boyfriend. And she had been in sex trafficking for quite some time before she just decided to take a chance and go and get away. So you see here, $150 billion a year global enterprise, criminal enterprise. The number now, from the time that video was done, is more like 40 million or more than 40 million. Sometimes you'll see the number 43 million people in slavery. The percentage of women and men, and in the video also mentioned women, but the coalition has served men. And we've served those who've been trafficked in commercial sex industry, as well as in labor exploitation. But these are global statistics, and you do see that 1 out of every 4 victims of trafficking around the world is a child, which the Sound of Freedom definitely represents. It does happen in every country and every state of the US, in all different types of communities around our state and around the country. Whoops, I'm sorry, let me go back. It is the fastest growing criminal enterprise in the world. I did want to highlight that. In the video, you saw that it's cited as the 2nd largest, second only to drug trafficking. It used to be the 3rd largest criminal enterprise. First was drug trafficking, second was arms trafficking, and third was the trafficking in human beings. So imagine the illegal sale of human beings being number 3, and then surpassing the illegal sale of arms to be right behind the illegal sale of drugs. So we're talking about children, women, and men as commodities for profit. And there is, again, $150 billion profit being made off of these humans that are as commodities. And to know that it's the fastest growing is quite frightening. I've always felt like drug trafficking is going to stay number 1 for a really long time for, I think, pretty obvious reasons. There is an intersection of those who are already in the criminal enterprises of drugs and arms, also getting into the business of trafficking humans. So it is fast growing because there are already criminal networks and criminal connections around the world, and even locally within communities, that it is definitely the fastest growing criminal enterprise in the world. So again, often referred to as modern slavery, but I wanted to point out in this slide that the first anti-trafficking federal law only was established in the year 2000. And yet this has been an enterprise that has gone on for many more decades than that. And it is commercial sex and labor services in which a person is exploited using force, fraud, or coercion. So those are the 3 main elements that have to be present for it to be a case of human trafficking. There is an exception to that, and it will be on the next slide here. And in terms of legislation, let me fast forward to the year 2022 for the state of Missouri. We only last year signed into law in August legislation that treated minors who were forced into prostitution as a victim and no longer arrested as a criminal for prostitution. So if you can imagine, only last year, we stopped arresting our children who were being sex trafficked in the prostitution industry, and instead recognizing them as victims and providing them the support they needed as a victim. So you see, again, and hopefully this bar is not in the way of the slide. It's on my screen, and I'm not sure how to get it out of the way here. But the trafficker takes action by means and for the purpose. So this is, in short, described as the AMP model to understand the elements of trafficking. What's important to highlight is under action, you see all of those types of actions: induce, harbor, provide, recruit, transport, obtain. So you often think of just the person who's actually providing that human commodity for profit, but it's also those individuals who are recruiting, who are transporting and harboring. They are also culpable as traffickers under federal law and also state law. So we have federal legislation and state legislation in human trafficking, and also international laws. And the by means of force, fraud, or coercion, and that exception is if it is a minor, if it's an individual under the age of 18 in the commercial sex industry, there does not have to be force, fraud, or coercion for that minor to be identified as a victim of sex trafficking. So that typically often looks like a minor who's maybe 16 or 17 years old and has an older boyfriend, maybe 20, maybe 25, whatever age you can imagine. And that boyfriend and the minor, there's love, there's devotion, there's commitment. That minor will do anything for the boyfriend out of love, and that can include providing sexual services to someone they know or a stranger for money. And the boyfriend will say, this is something we can do, and get money for gas in our car, or, you know, whatever, pay our phone bill or whatever. And that girlfriend, that minor, is doing it willingly. There's no force, fraud, or coercion. But in that arrangement and in that transaction, she is a victim of sex trafficking, and that older boyfriend is identified as a trafficker.
Nanette, can I ask a question?
Sure.
Under the action and the person who obtains, does that mean the person who brings in the victim, or does that mean the person who is using the victim's services?
So the buyer is a
buyer.
different, is a different,
Okay.
but this, who receives, so it could be a laborer who's obtaining multiple workers from another town or city or country. So that person is obtaining those workers, and we'll be addressing the buyer in another slide. For the purpose of, again, commercial sex or labor services, sex trafficking or labor trafficking, there's many other ways that we exploit human beings. We have organ trafficking, we have child brides, we have other ways that babies are sold. So there are many other ways that might not fit into these two types, but for purposes of today, these are the types of trafficking that we're talking about. We know it's a criminal enterprise, but we like to highlight that it's also a human rights violation. We often don't think of human rights being violated in our country, although there are many ways that we do consider that happening. Sometimes in our prison system, it just depends on how you view what your views are, but human trafficking is certainly a human rights violation. There is definitely degradation and violence against these victims that we often don't think about. Oftentimes, in the commercial sex industry, it's glamorized. So we don't, and we even talk about prostitution as somebody choosing to be in this industry. And it's just so much more violent and degrading and restrictive than we like to think of it. And so I like to highlight that there's certainly human rights violations going on in this kind of crime going on in the US. Here's a short introductory video on sex trafficking.
The world of a trafficking victim is constant fear, constant dehumanization, just feeling like you are not even a person anymore. It wasn't so much that nobody noticed, it was they didn't know what to look for or what to call it. Sex trafficking is the action of a perpetrator recruiting, transporting, maintaining, harboring through force, fraud, or coercion for the purposes of exploitation.
Law enforcement can be very proactive when it comes to combating sex trafficking, especially if you know where to look.
If you go on the internet, street-level prostitution, massage parlors, that's the most easily identifiable. That doesn't mean that all those individuals are victims of human trafficking, but it's an easy place to start.
I came in contact with a lot of law enforcement officials and they just weren't trained. Some of them were well-intentioned. What you're really gonna want to look at is other signs that indicate exploitation. I saw this in shelters, medical doctors as well, ER physicians. That's why training is so important.
One of our goals then is to try to find new innovative ways of identifying the victims, letting them know that there are people in law enforcement, human service providers, and the courts that would like to help them.
As a public defender, I started to look more critically at our representation of people charged with prostitution offenses. These clients weren't identifying themselves as victims of trafficking, but many of them had been completely controlled and scripted by the force, fraud, and coercion that we understand to make up human trafficking. We had to do better in trying to address these clients' needs so that people who may be in very dangerous, abusive, violent situations don't have to continue in those situations, and that an arrest make their life worse.
Honorable Judge Teresa Pauly is now presiding.
The idea here is not to prosecute the potential sex trafficking victims.
That happens a lot. A person is convicted of crimes and then are eliminated from all the services that could actually help them escape the trafficking.
You don't have to show any force, fraud, or coercion if they're a minor. You've got to be very, very astute in establishing the age, because what is difficult in a lot of jurisdictions, the trafficking statutes may have a different age and consider the child as adult.
The gangs are heavily involved in sex trafficking and running girls and boys. We need to start talking more about the problem. Schools can help with that. Youth groups, counselors, the teachers, the janitors, the school security, giving them a list of red flags of what to look for.
Providers out there often miss the cues. Young people who describe boyfriends significantly older. Young people who have bruises and cigarette burns.
Many times offenders will brand victims. It's a sign of ownership on their part, particularly if the tattoos are near the face and neck.
People who show up with a lot of cash that nobody knows where they're getting it from, or very expensive items.
In a courtroom setting, you can see when somebody is exerting improper power or control over a person by their demeanor, by where they sit, by how they try to get to talk to a client. Just watching for those sorts of things probably is the way we identify it most often.
Healthcare providers need to become sensitized to the whole issue of sex trafficking victimization.
Women who come in with multiple STDs, multiple unwanted pregnancies.
If they're brought into an emergency room setting, the injuries may be the fairly classic intimate partner violence injuries. As a healthcare provider, if you fail to identify and recognize this type of patient, you may very well fail to have saved their life.
The best way to get people in is to be available, to make sure that they know and that you are over providing them with resources. Here's my card, and if you need something, just call anytime, day or night, and we'll make sure we can get you some help.
I'm good, how are you?
Good.
Good.
You can create a robust approach that allows an individual to be addressed from all dimensions. Help them deal with their legal situations. Help them find safe places to live and get the kind of therapy that they need to move forward.
Having the resources available, allowing the victim to choose, but giving her support to do so is important.
Coming together, we can help foster their recovery from the kind of traumatic events that they have suffered.
The world of...
So that covered quite a bit regarding sex trafficking. This is an important to realize that there is a demand in both labor trafficking, sex trafficking. It is the demand that creates this industry to be so, causes this industry to be so prolific. If there wasn't a demand for purchasing children, boys, girls, and women and men for sexual purposes, then there wouldn't be this high incentive for not only individuals who are traffickers on the streets that often referred to as pimps, but also commercial venues like strip clubs and pornography venues that get a profit by the kind of business that they have. So there is a high demand. Again, we don't probably like to think about it, but it is oftentimes men who are from middle to upper class background who have means to pay money to secretly say they're going on a business trip or going on a lunch hour, whatever it might be, and are able to access these types of services with money. So there is an incentive by those who know they can profit from it. And that's important to keep in mind, that there is this demand. This is a short introductory video on labor trafficking.
Labor trafficking is when one person holds or obtains another person in coerced or forced labor. It's the individual employer or trafficker who's forcing, coercing, manipulating a worker. So the indicators that we see are usually of threats, passport and other identification theft. It's usually restricted movement, restricted communication.
For a case of trafficking, what we're usually going to be looking for are signs that the workers don't have a freedom to move about. They aren't getting paid for the work that they're performing. Maybe they don't have identifying documents. They're being made to live in substandard living conditions. They may be skilled or unskilled laborers, young or old, male or female.
I never heard them complain. You know, it didn't cross my mind that they were being abused.
When you'd ask the boys, how's it going? And none of them ever said, well, this happened to me or this happened to me or whatever.
We had a case, and it involved the parent exploitation of American workers, and they were adults with intellectual disabilities. They were transported from Texas to a turkey processing plant in Iowa. For approximately 35 years, these adults were working for a company for at least 40 hours per week, but only being paid $65 a month. They were hidden away from much of the world. These men were punished in cruel ways, and so after 35 or 40 years of blood, sweat, and tears, when these men were finally rescued, they had nothing to show for it. What we find in a case like that, even involving people with intellectual disabilities, is that the things that make them vulnerable are the very same things that you might see in a case involving foreign workers.
The same type of force and coercion that a shackle would be is the same kind of mental anguish they're going through with some of the things that a trafficker might threaten them with.
In order to build any kind of relationship, you have to go out to them. I'm talking about everything from working with the social service providers, the clinics, the churches, anywhere where labor trafficking victims may go for strength or for help. That's where law enforcement should be reaching out and proving that we're serious about helping.
I think it all starts by being a good listener and letting them know that you are going to try to do whatever you can to help.
I met my trafficker back in my country, Dominican Republic. They offer us job in the United States, working in hotels. When we came here, what happened is there was not such a job like that. They got a job in DVD manufacturing company. We already invest a lot of money to come, so we had to accept the job, and we did. But he treated us like we were no one. We were living in a one-bedroom apartment, and it was 3 people living there. My paycheck every week was like $39. When we were in that situation, people could see us. We were hardworking in that company. Nobody noticed anything. And then we met a Catholic charity person, and we explained her our situation, so she contacted one agent from ICE.
Ronnie had so many concerns. That was the biggest trust barrier to get over, to let him know that I am genuinely concerned for you and your friends and co-workers and for your families.
They made all possible to bring my wife and my 2 kids. I got a job thanks to the people that were out there to help me, but they changed our lives. I mean, they saved us. And I can tell you now, because I'm a survivor of human trafficking, yeah.
Labor trafficking is when...
So I don't know if you noticed, but that was a Kansas City Star news clip that you saw on the screen. This company was called Giant Labor Solutions. and they were just a front of a company that was exploiting workers from multiple countries. And because there's a commodification of humans in labor trafficking and sex trafficking, I'll use the word, they were dispersed or distributed throughout multiple states, including Missouri, because that was the home base. I think it was maybe 14 states around the country. These individuals ended up in multiple different jobs. And there were children as well who were brought in and sent to work in different places. There was a major operation to rescue these individuals, and it was out of the Kansas City U.S. Attorney's Office, Western District. And it again involved victims from many different countries. So it was quite a big case of labor trafficking. So again, it's the demand that fuels the high volume of supply, which are, of course, these individuals. And we like to make sure that we understand how our part is in all of this. We are part of the demand for what we purchase and the decisions we make of where we spend our money. And oftentimes we have no way of knowing that the items we purchase, whether it's something that we're in particular interested in because of the cheap price, or we go to a box store, big box store, or even a diamond, or just a shirt that has cotton in it. We just can't always know. The supply chain may involve exploited workers. And so there are those in the labor industry who know that if they can exploit laborers and get a higher profit, they will do so. And so we are all part of that, the economics of trafficking. So going through the trafficker and then the victim and the buyer to break this down a little, and I know you've seen some examples already in the videos, but you see the diversity of who traffickers can be in both sex trafficking, labor trafficking. They span all different ages, racial, ethnic, gender, socioeconomic background. When I say ages, I think of one high school cheerleader who actually trafficked, took advantage of a fellow high school female who had a disability, and by whatever means she used, was able to make a profit by actually making this young girl a victim of sex trafficking, actually selling her basically for sexual purposes. So it can be all ages and backgrounds. You know the high profile person, Jeffrey Epstein. We all read about him and all of the minors, females and young adult females that he groomed and recruited into sex trafficking. But it can be an intimate partner. We've had a victim whose husband isolated her away from Missouri and took her to Texas and sold her, sex trafficked her. And you have somebody who came from China to Colombia thinking they were coming on an educational program. Whether this was arranged by someone in another country or someone right here in Colombia, once she got here, she was forced into sex trafficking, basically into prostitution right here in Colombia, and was arrested for prostitution and thankfully got the right help and was just held back. But you can see many of these cases are not reported or investigated or prosecuted. People just simply want, to go back to their lives. We had a gentleman who was trafficked by a door-to-door sales crew. He was a young man out of Missouri, and he ended up somewhere far-flung into some other state with his door-to-door sales crew. And because he didn't make the quota, he was basically disposed of and left with nothing on a highway. And we heard about it simply because he was trying to find help to get back to Missouri. So they're all different types of individuals who can be a trafficker. Sorry. Oops. The victim. Oh my goodness, sorry, my hypersensitive. Again, you know that we've talked about the victim being all different, child, an adult, foreign born, someone from who's vulnerable because of domestic violence, vulnerable because of not having a job, vulnerable because they've experienced child sexual abuse and don't have a sense of self-esteem or who they are, and they can be easily groomed. could be someone who came with a crew to work on a job here in mid-Missouri all the way from Jacksonville, Florida, and then was abandoned, unpaid, and just left to try to find resources and a way back to home. So a victim can be anyone who has moved to our area, not familiar with resources, substance use disorders, those individuals who are drug users are taken advantage of because of their drug use. People who have mental illness, mental health issues, again, are taken advantage of because of their mental health. You may have already heard the news a few years ago. Missouri was in national news because we lost more than 900 children who were in our child welfare system, and we did not know where they were. And we know by statistics that it was likely that many of them were being sex trafficked at the time that they could not be found. Our runaway and homeless youth and homeless adults are easily targeted in trafficking. And then in terms of the, sorry, slide went the wrong way. The buyer can be anyone. Again, you have someone high profile like Jeffrey Epstein, but then you can have someone like any one of us who go and purchase something and don't realize that there's been a supply chain in that product or something in that product where there was child or adult forced labor. But in sex trafficking, I know you read the news about someone who was arrested for domestic violence or child abuse or child sexual abuse material, which is actually the proper term. We've used it in the past as child pornography. And we see like, how could this be? This person was an upstanding citizen. This person is a pastor of our church. This person was my neighbor. This person was a coach. We had 4 arrests in Sedalia of human trafficking charges, and they were arrested for soliciting prostitution or basically saying they were buying victims of sex trafficking. There was an operation in Missouri and Kansas, and there were arrests of both those who were commodifying and getting a profit from those who were being sex trafficked, as well as those who were buying those individuals for sexual purposes. There was a Potosi law enforcement officer who was arrested for sex trafficking. And imagine who those buyers were that he was selling these individuals to right there in Potosi, Missouri. So it's not like there's a demand coming from other places. They're people who are locally. We had a mom and the boyfriend who trafficked the disabled daughter out of a motel in Columbia, Missouri. Who were the buyers? People right here in our community. If we could stop the demand, we would stop buyers. We would not have a demand for trafficking. We can't talk about trafficking, especially sex trafficking, without talking about pornography. So here is a short
brain is
video about
a
that.
fascinating machine, really.
In terms of brain plasticity, everything that we do each and every day shapes our brain.
We call it neuroplastic. Just as plastic is changeable and malleable, we can change the shape of the brain.
And I actually did a study recently on this. So we put people in the scanner and we looked at their brain structure and associated this brain structure with the amount of pornography they consume. So basically we found in our study that the gray matter in the reward center is generally smaller in those people who watch more porn.
We've seen that with multiple addictions, from methamphetamine to cocaine, others, and now with pornography addiction. It's almost as if the brain is saying, I like pleasure, but you're killing me. This is too much.
My hypothesis was that the ventral striatum and the reward region should be bigger in those people watching pornography. And it's exactly the other way around. So,
were you shocked?
Yes.
There is solid research to show that brain functioning changes. The more you watch pornography, then you can get a blip up when the pornography is totally new. But totally new soon becomes old as you watch that.
People need to watch more or get more interesting and novel stuff to get the same level of activity in the reward system.
So it's a paradox. When it starts out, the porn is turning you on, and the more porn you watch, the less likely you are to get aroused.
which seems to indicate that the normal, regular thing you were used to isn't sufficient anymore.
The wonderful thing about the human mind is the power of curiosity to invent, to create. But what pornography does is it puts a straitjacket on our mind to say, no, this is the only thing I'm interested in, and then ultimately that any kind of compulsion is destructive.
So we talk about that and social media and the enormous impact it has on trafficking for commercial sex. There is an addiction in pornography, and so it's often referred to as a gateway to sex trafficking. So regardless of how we see or view porn from a moral standpoint, there's a scientific aspect that we have to understand of how people who are looking for more beyond the images or the videos they turn to, and often leads to the sexual exploitation of our children. Again, we've referred to in the past pornography that has used children in the images or videos as child porn, but now we want to use the term child sexual abuse material, using the words and calling it what it is. Because pornography as an industry, we look at quite differently than the victimization that happens in our children. And social media also, the engine behind the growth of the sex trade. It makes it easier to groom, easier to connect with. When our children walk in the house with a smartphone, they're walking in with countless strangers that have access to them through all the different apps, even through online gaming. And there has been just countless incidences of our children. We had one individual that from a mid-Missouri town that went missing. She was supposed to be staying overnight with her friend, and thankfully the friend called the parents, which oftentimes our young people don't do, and said, your daughter actually didn't come here. I think she's in Chicago, because she found someone online that she met. And it turned out this young 15-year-old had gone with two other minor children. One was a female, one was a male, with a young 20-something-year-old who drove them all the way to Chicago from Missouri. And it probably was based on that connection this young gal had with someone in Chicago through social media. They went missing on Friday, and they were found. Thankfully, we had a connection with Highway Patrol, who reached out to their Chicago counterparts, and they were found, thankfully, on Sunday morning. So social media plays a great part, and we always encourage that adults who have children in their circle of influence, that they have conversations and try to be that safe person for them. So much more that can be said, but I want to begin to wrap up with Anne's video here.
I had my life together. I owned my own house. I worked at my factory for 15 years. I had my stuff together. I did everything myself. I was very independent. I was a supervisor at the factory, but I didn't have a guy. So I got set up on a blind date, and this guy did everything, from sending me flowers, take me to concerts, to dinners, to you name it, he did it. And he talked me into, I had back issues anyway, but he talked me into quitting my job after 15 years and going on an 18-wheeler with him, cross-country deliveries. Once I got in the truck, it was like night and day. He physically locked me in that truck and sold me on Craigslist at truck stops. I never got out of the truck, not even to use the bathroom. I was given a Kool-Aid pitcher. Showers were in truck stops, and I was not allowed to go alone, ever. Phone calls with my family, he was right there. I had to have it on speaker. My family didn't know anything. We'd go to a different state. We didn't get to go to rest stops, but he would go to the state line, get me out of the truck, stand me next to this, whatever state we're in, and take a picture and Facebook it. But nobody ever noticed I was in the same sweatshirt, same clothes, month after month. He's a monster. I call him the monster. I lost my house. I lost my identity. I lost faith in humanity. And we were coming back one night, and I just made a conscious choice. I'm not getting back in that truck. We went to my house to do laundry, and I was not going to get back in that truck. And I literally fought for my life I didn't weigh 100 pounds. I ended up going to the women's shelter in Jeff City because he was stalking me. He'd drive by my house middle of the night. So I met Nanette at the shelter through another person who knew her. And that's pretty much for my life. I can't say it was easy, but it's taken me a long few years to get where I am now. I lost everything. And the coalition got me, I mean, everything I had was in that truck. So I did not have my glasses, I did not have my phone, I did not have a computer. Everything was gone. Nanette and the coalition got me glasses, and it took quite a while for me to eat because I was afraid everybody, they were putting shit in my food like he did. It was hell. And I literally would be dead if it wasn't for the coalition. I had my life together. I owned my own.
So I just wanted to say Anne was in her 40s when she was trafficked. So it can happen to even adults. She's been, married and divorced and had grandchildren, and it was a boyfriend who took her on the road. He was a truck driver, but once he got on the road, everything flipped. So it also speaks to some of the partners, domestic violence shelters that reach out to us, the hospitals, the homeless programs, social service agencies, even probation parole officers reaching out because they find that there's a individual who has trafficking in their background. I can hand out in these posters, but if you go to the Department of Public Safety Human Trafficking website, there are posters that Missouri passed by state law to distribute these around the state that give the hotline number. And I know there's questions. Let me just I also want to encourage you to go to slaveryfootprint.org to take a slavery survey that will tell you how many slaves work for you, slaveryfootprint.org. And there's different ways, but I'll go ahead and take take questions. If somebody wants to read the chat, I will open also. Okay.
Dave Rathel, do you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Yes.
And I'll scroll back to the chat.
I just want to know if the individual who abused Anne was ever held accountable, and if not, why not?
So excellent, because there are very few successfully investigated and prosecuted cases. There are many deterrents. One is someone not wanting to trust law enforcement to even report it. Also, you don't have law enforcement necessarily trained or having the resources to investigate. Oftentimes it has to be investigated at federal level. And so they have to kind of take the cases that they can handle. And a lot of cases go by the wayside, and you just have someone who might start the investigation, but the victim doesn't have the stability. We had a victim that left Oregon and ended up Missouri, and the case was being prosecuted in Oregon, and she thought nothing was happening, but actually it went to trial and was successfully prosecuted, and they were able to find her here in Missouri. The case of Anne, he ended up running. They found him in Texas. All the evidence, which would have been, video from the different gas stations, which is where he always sold her, at the shower rooms and in the truck. By the time she was able to talk to law enforcement, no such videos existed. And so they had kind of a watch on him to see where he might trip up again. There were other things he did that they could have maybe arrested him for if he was caught again, but they've never been able to do that.
Nanette, in the chat, really, there was a little side conversation. Kathy Jensen mentioned that this whole thing made her think of a lot of the men who end up doing roofing, and that her neighbor's roof was just reshingled, and the neighbor commented none of those men spoke a word of English, which could certainly be somebody who was ripe for exploitation if they can't communicate.
So in Columbia, we have those construction crews, roofing crews, lawn crews. We have many different ways in our restaurants, in the kitchens. We have many individuals who are not native to the U.S. And they're so difficult to know who is and who isn't a victim. They might be here on a special visa, that they're here legally. Some are not here legally, but either way, they are protected. But how do they get to someone? How are they seen by someone that could possibly report exploitation? It's very, very difficult. And so I would say, it's very likely that many of the workers on all these different kinds of crews who are foreign born, there is some sort of labor exploitation in terms of their pay. You know, there might be others that are subcontracted and getting great pay and nothing is happening, but they all look the same to us. So how do we know? It's very difficult. We had someone who was, I mentioned, on a construction crew, and he was promised pay. It was great pay. Everything seemed above board. It was what workers expected in terms of not being paid for the first 2 weeks, but then they weren't paid for after the first 2 weeks. They weren't paid for all the weeks they worked. And this individual ended up, left early. They left him and his roommate in a cheap motel in Columbia. They ended up in a work site in Fulton, and it was a major remodeling job. The police went back, law enforcement went back with the Attorney General's office, couldn't find the proper permits for the kind of remodeling job that was done. And I'm sure the homeowner had no idea that there were laborers who were being exploited. So it's very difficult. That's why labor trafficking is less reported, less identified than sex trafficking. Somebody asked
the
about
last question.
Yeah. Okay. Go
Yes,
ahead.
that's the one about laws. Go ahead. Yeah, the one about laws was the last one, and then we'll be all caught up with chat.
Yeah. So think about that. That it took us, to pass a law to say we're not going to arrest our children for prostitution and see them as victims. So every law that does pass, the poster law that I showed you, the poster, it took 3 years to pass the law for the Department of Public Safety to create and distribute a poster. To have this hotline number widely visible around our state. So there have been many laws that go after the buyer, the demand side. Once somebody tried to pass a bill that those who purchased victims of sex trafficking would be on the sexual predator list. And would be well known on a list that you could look at, and that didn't go anywhere. So it's been very difficult to pass any legislation that we have, but we have over time, and we just need to continue to go after it. But there's definitely, in the 15 years the coalition has existed, there's definitely been a shift in the understanding and the sensitivity to this issue. Yes, and I see that. Yeah, there are many deterrents for sure. I'm happy to send the PowerPoint. We share. But certainly more protection of the victims themselves, which we at least did for children, but also deterrents to the buyers. And we have had operations. There used to be what you'd hear of being prostitution stings. And those were to catch the individuals who were providing the services. Now there are operations that go after the buyers and also go after those who are responding to ads as those who are providing the services and bringing them in and asking if they want help. So we have done a lot of different things. Highway Patrol has done a great job of educating and shifting their ways of addressing this issue.
Great. Does anybody else have a question? I don't see any.
I do want to say we have a documentary called Hope Road. It's available on PBS, and the coalition had the privilege of being a part of it. And one of the survivors, the one who left Oregon and came to Missouri, there are individuals, both male and female, who talk about their being victims of child sex trafficking and sharing as adults and other types of challenges that they face as adults. And so if anyone wants to have access to showing that, we'd love to partner with you. Pam Springsteel has raised her hand.
I just want to know if the laws are sufficient.
No. No. But along with the laws, there has to be education, because law enforcement will tell you the likely community members that are reporting are everyday individuals like you and me. When we see something suspicious, and if we aren't aware, then it's very difficult to report.
Well, if we ask our lawmakers to write a law, what does it need to be? You're saying that the law is not sufficient.
So we have the laws that
Okay.
say
Okay.
we violate, human trafficking is a violation, but we have to dig in deeper to create the resources and the safety nets for victims, for making the demand more punishable, deterrence to that, to the demand, to the buyers. There are hefty jail sentences for the traffickers, to be sure, but that's just one leg of sort of the other elements, which is the buyer end and the victim end. And again, we just last year passed to protect our children from being arrested for prostitution.
Okay, thank you. I understand now.
Anyone else? This has been really interesting.
Quick
Yeah.
announcement that the first Thursday of every month, we have a community meeting that's open to anyone on Zoom and in person. If anyone wants to learn more about that. The second Thursday of every month, we host a survivor group. If anyone wants to support our providing a meal and fellowship time for survivors. And October 14th, we're going to have a walk at Stevens Lake Park. It's a walk for freedom. It will be a silent walk to bring global awareness for local action, and we'll be joining with groups in cities around the country.
Thank you. We can make sure and add that to our announcements in our calendar. Thanks for letting us know about that. If I don't see any more questions, I guess we can just thank Nanette for her time. This has been, of course, not a very happy topic for a Friday, but a necessary topic, and one that, it's good to know more about. So thank you very much for taking the time to come talk to us about this today.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, we appreciate you and your work. Looks like Pam